Today's conversation is with a spoken word artist who has performed for Michelle Obama at the Sundance Festival and for the United Nations. Today, she shares the creative process that guides her path. Have you ever felt deep within that there's something more you're supposed to be doing, but you're not sure what? Have you ever felt like you're producing a lot, but not expressing at all? Welcome to She Made It. I'm your host, Elle Zimmerman, and I am on a mission to help you cultivate meaning through the path of creativity. Join me to eavesdrop on conversations with brave women who broke through their resistances into a life of authenticity. Because I believe if she made it, you can too. Welcome, Clara.
Hi, Elle. I'm so glad to be back here in the new year.
Is 2020 a decade change?
Yeah.
Is it a century change or just a decade?
New decade.
A new decade. Okay.
So it's the 20s again.
It's the 20s again. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, today's guest is just this incredibly beautiful, soulful, intelligent artist that you introduced to the She Made It audience. So I'd love you to share a little bit about how you discovered Jinahie for our listeners.
Right. So I met Jinahie at the Story Conference, which was this wonderful conference that I went to in Nashville back in September. And it was a gathering of creatives who are in all different sorts of fields, but Jinahie spoke from the stage. And the whole theme of the conference was liminal space and what's our story when we're sort of in between stories. And she did spoken word and talked about her experience being the daughter of immigrants and shared her love for words and what it means to be in between to her. It was beautiful. And I actually happened to run into her in the lobby after the conference and just connected with her immediately. We talked a little bit about her work as a therapist and a spoken word artist. And I just thought, I think she'd be the perfect person to have on She Made It.
On this episode of She Made It, I am so happy to welcome Jinahie. Jinahie is a performance artist, a social justice activist, a therapist, and she's going to share with us a little bit about her beginning and how she became a performance artist, a spoken word artist, and what that even means, as well as the way her art is changing the world. So welcome, Jinahie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so tell me, Jinahie is in her home office, and where is that? Where are you today?
So I am based out of Baltimore, Maryland, but very much a child of the world. So have lived in many, many places, but right now am living in Baltimore.
Yeah, and and having been a child of the world, and I know you are, you're a child of Egyptian American parents, or no, your parents were Egyptian immigrants, correct?
Yeah, so both of my parents were born and raised in Cairo, Egypt, and then they got married and immigrated to the United States. And so me and my sisters were born here. But my father worked for the U.S. government, and so we would move to a different country every 3 years, live there for 3 years, and then move again to another different country. And so I've lived in 8 different countries and live a very nomadic kind of lifestyle. But
yeah.
But yes, I am of Egyptian American heritage, and I'm first generation Egyptian American.
Super cool. And so how long have you been in the Baltimore area?
I've been in the Baltimore area for just a few years now, not very long, and I'll probably move again somewhere else very soon. I tend to have trouble living in one place for too long. I like exploring and traveling. And becoming sort of a native of wherever I move to. So I've just been here for a few years, and I really love it.
Yeah, and so the way that we came across your work and who you are as a performer is through the Story Conference. And Clara attended and just came back on fire about what you do, how you transform the audience. And she shared a little bit with me, but I had the pleasure of watching your TED Talk, which is different than spoken word poetry. So if you were to describe what that is. How would you describe that form of art?
Yeah, so spoken word poetry or spoken word art is very much performance poetry. So it's not the kind of page poetry that you grow up reading in school, right? It's not your Shakespeare's. It is very different in the sense that spoken word came from the 60s and the 70s, the beat poets, and there were these poets that really wanted to combine art with revolution and art with activism. And so spoken word is this history of oral tradition and oral storytelling that makes poetry, I think, far more accessible to the ear and to people who really have no context in what traditional poetry or even what modern poetry is like. And so spoken word is an artist gets up on stage, they are a poet, they are a writer, and they perform their work out loud. And they do it with a cadence, and they do it with, different performance techniques. And so it's sort of like a mix of, it is poetry, but it also brings this element of performance in the same way that, hip hop does. So it's not just a poem on a page. It is this living, breathing kind of work that people get to see live, which I think, one, makes poetry far more accessible, and two, makes poetry a lot more fun, right? You're not just reading poetry in the classroom, and it's something that we can relate to in our everyday life. So that is what I do. I am a performance poet.
Yeah. So what's fascinating about what I've been learning about you is that you have sort of a traditional education. You studied English, and now you also are a therapist. And so how did the performance even come to be?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I actually, my first introduction to spoken word was when I was really young. There used to be a show called HBO Def Jam Poetry, and it was really popular, I want to say like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I had just watched it in passing and never thought that I would do that, right? I never woke up one morning and said, you know what, I'm going to be a spoken word artist. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a teenager, sort of just lost in my own teenage world. And then I was going through this really difficult time in high school, struggling so much with self-esteem and depression and so much of, I think, what the typical teenage experience is. And I remember one day I was just going through this really, really difficult time in my life. And something in my head just said, pick up a pen. And I remember I was grieving in my room. I was crying my eyes out, and something just said, pick up a pen. So I picked up a pen and I picked up a notebook and I wrote what would eventually become my first poem. And since then, I've had the opportunity to compete in poetry. I've had the opportunity to perform as a spoken word artist and to travel and tour the country with my work. And so right now I'm doing a national college and university tour, but I sort of fell into this art form by accident. Really, the art form found me more than I ever saw it. And so I'm an artist by accident in every sense of the word. And yeah. I am so grateful for this art form because it's no exaggeration to say that this art form saved my life and came into my life at a time when I really, really needed an outlet. And I think that's what keeps me doing it is I see how much it changed my life and transformed me. Especially as a 16-year-old girl, being able to find your voice and step on stage and be front and center on a microphone, and feeling like your voice and your story matters. That to me was so powerful. And being able to share that experience with other people and welcome them into this art form is so healing and so rewarding for me. And so I'm an artist by accident, but now an artist of intention.
Yeah. So I have a question. Do you remember that very first taking the pen to paper words and putting them on stage? Do you remember that?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I remember that entire experience. I remember the first day I wrote a poem, I felt, I think, what people call being in the zone, right? I felt flow for the very first time. And it's this moment where you lose track of space and time. You forget to eat, right? You forget to sleep. You're just caught in this creative frenzy. And it feels like this incredible out of body experience. You just feel so connected. And you really feel like something else is doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's the feeling that everybody is constantly seeking. Like there's so much discontent, and it's that flow that I think people are searching for, because it does feel connected to a higher power, the universe, ourselves. And yeah, so what was that stepping on stage first experience like?
Absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
It's never easy. And I was a teenager at the time. And I remember my hands were shaking and my mouth was so dry. I was nervous beyond belief. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. And I think, like they say that like public speaking is everyone's number one fear. And it was definitely mine, and sometimes still is. But I remember stepping on stage and being so nervous that I really just wanted to like puke and pee in my own pants. Like that's how scared I was. But I remember it being also such a liberating and freeing experience. It did something to my spirit. And in that moment, I knew this is it. I want to keep doing this for as long as I possibly can.
So I would love if you could share, because I don't think many of us have the experience of seeing that sort of performance art. So do you have a little snippet you could share with us just to give us an idea of what that experience might be like for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can do a little snippet of a piece. This piece is a dedication to my mother, who is an immigrant and who worked so hard to make sure that my English was perfect. And she is very much the reason that I became a poet, even if it's by accident. But this poem is also in dedication to all of the immigrants and refugees who work so hard to make a good living for themselves and make a better life for their children. So here is that poem, and it is called The Letter P. When the man in the cashier line tells me I speak perfect English, I want to tell him that when I was young, I laughed at the way my mother said the word perfect. Because there is no equivalent for the letter P in the Arabic alphabet, the word perfect was impossible for my mother to pronounce. The last time I made that joke was the first time I made my mother cry, and the first time I remember her crying, her eyes filled with something I could not understand. I knew I was to blame, how I wished I could pray myself mute by morning as she tucked me into bed. In the days that followed, I overheard my mother practicing the letter P everywhere. She would fix her posture, close her eyes, give it a try, but the letter P would always only sound like its not so distant cousin, the letter B. She would drill the difference between B and P every night before she went to sleep. BP, 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 brush, she'd say. Toothpaste, she'd say. Book, bed, pray, sleep, she'd say, until her lips begged for pause for me. The letter P is easy. The letter P is as painless as pouring water from a pitcher. For her, the letter P is a reminder of the pain I had caused in plain English. It is the reason she apologizes to people for not being able to say people. The reason people ask her if she is from here and tell her to go back home when she is already home. The letter P is the accent that makes her feel less American. The guilt sticks like a talon in my gut. And so that is an excerpt of the letter P.
I love that's so powerful.
Oh, thank you.
Because we are the words and the images, and yeah, thank you so much. And that goes on, right? That's longer.
Yes, that is a longer piece. But thank you so much.
Yeah, so cool. I also marvel at your incredible vocal power and the resonance, because my background is acting, singing. So I studied years of vocal technique. And did you do that, or is this all sort of just a natural developed gift?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I come from a family of storytellers, people who, some of my favorite childhood memories were me just sitting at my grandmother's feet or my grandfather's feet and them telling me stories that would just take over my world, right? Like the teapot could be whistling for minutes in the background and you wouldn't even notice because they were just such grand and powerful storytellers. They would sort of whip you into this alternate universe. And so I learned sort of through my elders, the art of storytelling. But I also practice. I practice quite a bit, as every artist should, and as any artist would. I do practice quite a bit. So there is some vocal training in there, and also just learning the art of spoken word from mentors and friends. So a lot of voice control, a lot of breath control, lots of work on enunciation and things like that. And as you can imagine, we don't have any background singers and we don't have like a music track behind us. So if I mess up, man, it really shows.
Yeah, and I bet because there is such a pace and it's like rolling off your tongue. Have you ever had like a really crazy like blunder like that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do before I get up on stage is I do a lot of tongue twisters, just to sort of prepare myself for what the poems require. But I've tripped over my own words. I've forgotten my own lines. I've had to freestyle on stage because I just forgot the whole poem. So I had to make a new one on the spot. I have been through maybe like every single performance blunder you can imagine. I've fallen on stage and things like that. But I think what's so lovely about performance is that, we so often put this pressure on ourselves that a performance of any kind has to be perfect. And one of the things that performance has taught me is truly it's not perfection that attracts people or that grips people. It's the willingness to be vulnerable and the willingness to be authentic. And that even if you mess up, that is perfection in and of itself, right? That is the most raw and tender expression of you. And so performance has really disciplined me to practice vulnerability in that way. So I embrace those mistakes.
Yeah. And one of the things that is unique about you is that you are, because as an actress, I'm the interpreter of the work, of the creative work. I get to be, bring full dimension to a character, to a story, but somebody else wrote it. You are writing the words. So what I'm curious about is that you have this background, your cultural history, the love of words and language, but then also you're a therapist.
Yes.
So how does all that with being an artist and a therapist and how you take your, sort of like your cultural history and bring it to the stage, how do you view that and how does all that fit together for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when I tell people I'm an artist and a therapist, they're like, those sound so different from one another. But to me, truly, they're not. They are quite complementary to each other. That as an artist and as a therapist, what I'm really trying to do always is live in someone else's story, even if it's just for a moment, to have a level of understanding that that transcends my own experience. And when I'm writing or when I'm in the therapy room, I exist in feeling with someone else's story. I exist in feeling with their experience, whether it's their joy, their triumph, their sorrow, their suffering. And so what I'm really trying to do with my work, both as an artist and therapist, is come from a place of healing. That yes, there is so much suffering in the world, but there's also so much space to transform pain into power. And so whether I'm acting as an artist or as a therapist, the question is, how can we create new, more empowering stories? And so whether I'm sitting at home and writing a poem or whether I'm sitting in a room and giving counseling, the question is really, how can we re-envision our own lives?
Yeah. Yeah, and because I did listen to your TED Talk, which I loved because you talked a lot about creativity, which is a passion of mine, but you talk about that you're a story collector. What was what you said? Like being a therapist was you hear a story, someone's life story, and then as the performance artist, you're telling the story, or how did you frame that?
Yeah, so I consider myself both a storyteller and collector. I firmly believe that you can't say something without having heard it from somewhere else first. And so, I'm not a self-made artist by any means. The stories that I tell are a collection and sort of this amalgam of other people's experiences, whether it's my own family or someone else's or a stranger, whatever it is. I am always a listener first. I am a listener before I am a teller, or before I am a speaker. And so a lot of what I do in my own creative process is I go out listening for stories, right? I go out and I put my ears on full volume. And sometimes the story will come like I'm sitting on a train and I hear a stranger having a conversation. And I think to myself, wow, that's a great poem. And so I'm always a listener first. I'm a collector first. And what I look for is any story or any line from anyone that really resonates with me, right? That just sparks that creativity in me. And once I have it, I know I have it. There's no question. And I go back home and I sit with it for a few hours until art comes out.
So I have a question. What if I'm your therapy patient? Do I have to be worried?
No. So there's so many ethics and laws around confidentiality, and I do not mess with that. I take all of that very seriously. As a therapist, confidentiality is so sacred to our work.
But you're also telling.
Can happen without it.
Yeah, and you're also telling. From what I understand, you're telling a universal story, the human story. It's the things that connect us that create sort of like the through line for your stories.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not throwing my clients' lives out there for the world to see, but I am collecting many stories of many people, those that I know and those that I don't, and always doing it ethically and always doing it from a place of what is right and what is just. So no, my clients have no reason to worry.
Well, and also I know you're very passionate about serving others and helping and healing others. And it comes through so clearly. And I love how you've coined a new word, artivism.
Artivism. Yeah. So artivism is I don't know that it's been in use. I mean, I've heard maybe like 2 other people use it, but I do consider myself an artivist. And for those listening who don't know, artivism is this combination of art and activism. So what I do as an artist is I combine art and activism to see what it means to create with a conscience and what it means to use art to raise consciousness. And I know all of that sounds really abstract, but really the heart of it is how can we tell stories that break the bind and break the border of stigmas and stereotypes? And how can we really see through to someone's full humanity? How can we tell a story that captures every being's breadth and depth? And so that's what that's really my craft is capturing humanity at its core.
And what are you most passionate about right now? Like when you're speaking to college students, or like what is the thing you're being an activist about?
Yeah. So some issues that are really near and dear to me are obviously immigration and the refugee crisis that we're seeing. That's unprecedented in our human history. So those are 2 things that are very near and dear to me, and also women and gender violence. Right, as a woman, it's sort of impossible to not get fired up about the oppression and the level of violence that we're seeing against women. But also, I don't just consider activism as like, what are the hottest social justice topics, right? For me, activism is really about healing on any level. That even self-care, even self-love is a revolution. And so when somebody asks me like, oh, you're an activist, what causes are you fighting for? The cause that I'm fighting for first and foremost is the self. The cause that I fight for is the cause of love. And I think that's enough, right? I think love is our highest form of revolution.
Do you create controversy?
Do I? If I do, I'm glad I do. I don't go out looking for a battle, but if it's worth fighting, I'll be first on the line. I don't think I create controversy so much as I'm willing to explore it.
And I would say maybe controversy might be too hard of a word. I might say like a provoker of conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I love most about spoken word, is that really the art form is just me talking, right? And to take something that we do every day, right? We talk every day, but to take something that we do every day and make it an art form, and to expand on the conversations that we may not be having in our everyday life, and to create more dialogue, and to spark an idea that someone may not have had before. That is what I hope people walk away with. And so, yes, I hope that I am a dialogue maker and creator and provocateur of the soul. Yes, that would be a lovely thing. And I hope people do walk away with more to talk about after they see me talk about whatever it is that they see. I do. I hope they talk more.
Awesome. Well, I know that you are doing, I think, an art form that isn't like mainstream. And being the provoker of conversation, how when you started as a teenager, creating, expressing, finding your voice, how do you create now? Because I feel like when you were a teenager, it came out of this just need to identify yourself, become aware. But what about now?
Yeah, my teenage story is very cliche, right? Like. The young girl with the diary is sort of how it started, but now it comes with a lot more intention, and so I think a lot more clearly about what does it mean to tell a story in a right way, in a just way, in a way where all sides can feel heard and understood. And so my creative process, to be honest with you, there is none. I mean, and I wish I had so much structure in my creative process. I know people that do, but for me, I really just spend hours sitting in my room in sweats. I may or may not shower if I'm really working hard. I mean, I really just spend hours working on the thing until it is done. And it is one of my favorite feelings to be in that flow and to feel taken by something much bigger than yourself. And I don't wait for inspiration. I do write every day. I write at least 30 minutes every day, but there's no telling if it'll be any good. I mean, most of it is trash and I throw it away. But when an idea really hits me, I spend hours on it, and sometimes days, and sometimes years. Sometimes I'll write, put it away in a drawer somewhere, and it'll come back to me, and the poem will say, "Hey, I'm ready. I'm fully formed now." But more than anything, my creative process is about collecting stuff that inspires me. Collecting lines, collecting conversations, collecting stories, and keeping it somewhere and letting the poem marinate on its own, right? I'm very much a believer that the poem finds you. So I let it find me, and I'm open to it. And yeah, my creative process is a mess, as all creative processes, I'm sure, are.
Well, it actually, from my perspective, it sounds like it's sort of this organized chaos. It's like you have a discipline, you have a commitment, you do the daily writing, you understand your process, that it's coming to you. But then you know that if the inspiration is there, if the clarity is coming, you got to sit with it. You said you'll sit there in your sweats and you'll work, you'll do the work if you know the time is right. So it's kind of unorganized, in terms of if we think of like our traditional school system and the way our kind of our country works. But as a creative, it feels very organic and consistent to me.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you for your compliment. I love that. And I love that you say, like, when the time is right, you sit. Yeah. Right? And I had a mentor who always used to tell me, if you want to be a good writer, you just sit your ass in the chair. Yeah. And that there's no way out of it, right? You do the work. And I think so often we think of artists that they just like flex their creative muscle and then art comes out. And truly art is a discipline. Truly art is, it's a lot like being an athlete, except you're giving your brain a good sweat, And so I very much believe in the discipline of being an artist, that if you're not doing something every day to feed your work, then you are not doing the work. Yeah. So I sit every day and I let the muses know when to find me and where they can find me so that when they're ready, I'm available. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're touring colleges right now, is this back to the topics you said about immigration and the sort of female violence? And is that what you're talking about with them?
So it's a bit different, and I have to say every show is different. Sometimes people will ask me to speak on a theme, and I'll create new work for that. Or sometimes, there's a certain event that has a specific theme, and so my work changes with each show. I have to say that I would get bored if I get up on stage and do the same poems every time, and so I don't. I'm always challenging myself to change things in my own show, but I do have different set lists that I choose from. Yeah. And yes, my work is about art and activism, but it's also about insecurities and family dysfunction and everyday conversations and fun facts. And so although there is, I think, this very serious element of what we think of when we think of art and activism, I'm also quite a playful artist. And so I do work that, that is more amusing than it is for the sake of activism. And I believe that art should be both serious and playful. And so I try to keep a good balance of the two.
Yeah, I just love that. It's it keeps it's alive and it's always living, and so it reflects the world in a more authentic way, for sure. The other thing I'd like to ask you, just from sort of like a practical standpoint, people always ask me, okay, how do I get from here to there? They know they want to be there. They're here. What's that journey? And they often compare themselves to you stepping on stage. You have a TED Talk, you're doing a college tour, but they're a writer, a performer. They want to do what you're doing. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? And what stumbling blocks, what resistances came up to go from writing as a high school student to now really being honored and sought out?
Oh, thank you. I have so many people ask me that question too. And what I tell them is I remind them that I am an artist by accident. And I think so often when we're at stage one and we're looking at all the other bases we want to hit, we think to ourselves, okay, I have to plan out the journey. I have to make a game plan. And what I tell people is that I am a horrible planner. I mean, you could not meet a worse planner than me. And, I think that you have to have faith in the journey, that for any creative, we have to remind ourselves that we are walking into uncharted territory and that the path is not made clear by thinking about which step to take. The path is made clear by walking, that the path will light up in front of you as you take the steps.
Right. But I'm going to challenge you. But I'm going to challenge you about that because some people don't know how to see the lighted path. Mm-hmm. So how do you tap into seeing the path? Because what you're saying is that you're saying really give it over. You're saying have the discipline, do the work, and believe, keep doing the practice, and it will show up before you. But what if you don't see it? Mm-hmm. How do you know?
You take the first step. Truly, you take the first step, right? And the thing is that I think what we hate as human beings is we hate uncertainty and we hate ambiguity, and those things make us so nervous and so scared. But it's like they say, right? The cliche that fortune favors the bold. And if you're bold enough to take that step, then step 2 will appear. And then when you take step 2, step 3 will appear. And it's just a matter of honoring that path, right? Taking the first step and surrendering to what comes, and having faith that if you leap, the net will appear, because it always does. And so, I can't give like a step-by-step plan, because there is none. I know the twists and turns of my own journey. And what I always encourage people to do is to follow their curiosity, no matter how silly or how stupid or how crazy it may seem. That following your curiosity is truly the best way to keep capturing your own creativity.
Yeah. Do you set goals, or do you let the goals sort of unfold?
I actually just let the goals sort of unfold. I know that's every motivational speaker would tell you that is wrong, that you should set goals. But my only goal is to be the best kind of artist that I can be. And that's why I sit every day and write. But other than that, I'm not setting any goals besides sit down every day and write. The rest of what happens is not up to me.
Yeah. And have there been any, because I love that, first of all, I'm just sort of provoking you to get, because I'm trying to unpeel that process, because it is a question people ask me all the time. And it's fascinating to see someone who, like you have a very high level of success in what you do, to be so willing to surrender and to do the work and let the rest go.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that has really surprised you in taking that approach?
Yeah, I have the word surrender tattooed on my writing hand, on my right hand.
Ooh, I love that. That helps, doesn't it?
Yes, it's a lovely reminder to just surrender to the process. Just surrender. And that's what creativity is. It is an act of spiritual surrender. It is nothing else. And we like to try to make strategies or blueprints or step-by-step plans, but there is none, right? Creativity transcends us in that way. And yeah, so much has surprised me. I think, like any other creative, sometimes I'm riddled by self-doubt, right? Sometimes I'm so paralyzed by my own fear. Sometimes I think, oh my gosh, am I actually a poet for a living? Who is a poet for a living? That doesn't make any sense. But what surprises me is that even on those days, even on the days where I doubt myself and where I am so afraid, that I find so much love and support for the work that I create. And I think that anyone who decides to take the first step into their creativity and to honor their path will find that so much support comes from places that you would never expect. That people will come out by the droves to cheer you on from the sidelines. That people will root you on even on days where you feel like, good God, what am I doing? And that's what has surprised me more than anything, is other people's capacity to surrender to the process with you and to support you on your path.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It's fascinating for me because on the podcast, we speak to such a wide range of artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, and everyone's process there's an inherent wisdom to it, but they're all so different. So I think it's also really, it's about surrendering to what is the best for you, for me, for, yeah. Yeah. Can you remember your very first creative memory?
Oh, wow. Like, oh dear. Oh my goodness. I don't know that anybody has ever asked me that question before. That might be the best interview question I've ever had. my first creative memory, there's so many. I think my first would have to be, I was in the 5th grade, and I was living in Germany with my family. My family was living in Germany for 3 years, and my sister loved poetry. Right, she used to read me poetry every night before I would go to sleep. And mind you, I was like 8 years old. Did I understand a single word of what she was saying? Absolutely not. But I remember one day I was about to sleep, and she came into my room and she read me Hamlet. And I don't recommend that anybody read Hamlet to a 5th grader, right? Because there's just like topics in there that reading to a 5th grader. And I remember she performed it for me. She performed me Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. And I didn't understand a single word. But I remember thinking to myself, those are the most beautiful words I've ever heard. And I didn't understand it one bit, but my spirit did, right? My mind was too young to understand, but my spirit, just something resonated with me in that moment. And I wanted to go in search of whatever that was. What is it that even when your brain can't quite fathom what's happening, your spirit says, yep, I get it. Yep, that's it. Yep, that's the spark. And I went in search of that, and I'm very much still in search of that. That what is that level of understanding that resonates with our spirit so strongly, and where does it come from, and how can you recreate that? And don't get me wrong, I will never be Shakespeare, never. But I want to know, what is it that moves us?
Mm-hmm.
That's my first.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful. And it's so clear to me listening, and I'm sure to our listeners, that you were born to be doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, you talk about the stories of your grandparents. You talk about the words of your sister reading to you. You talk about how when you were, in those teenage years, the first thing you went to was the writing. And then it accidentally, which I'm going to put in air quotes because you obviously are very, your practice. Your key to creation is through the surrender and letting the universe provide for you. And so it's just very much an inspiration for me. And for those that sometimes wrestle with what's the next thing, they're gripping onto life to try to figure things out. It is about a letting go and trusting. And so thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. It's about a letting go and trusting. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So one final question to wrap up. I'd like to know, you've shared so many wonderful tidbits but if you had to share your biggest takeaway for maybe a younger version of you,
mm-hmm.
the woman that is struggling and doesn't even really know how to surrender, what would be your advice for that first step?
Very simple. It would be very simple. It would be, you are so worthy. You are so worthy. And you may not see it and you may not feel it, but you are blossoming and budding over with worth. And even now, sometimes I have to remind myself that I am worthy, right? We forget sometimes how worthy, how capable, how competent we are, especially as women, especially with all of the double binds and messages that we get that are sometimes destructive and self-sabotaging. And I remind myself every day, you are worthy. And I treat myself the way that I would treat a child. I try to talk to myself very kindly. And I remind my inner child, the person that all my art comes from, that you are worthy. More than you will ever know. You are worthy.
Thank you. Thank you. It was so great to talk to you today.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if people want to kind of follow what you're doing, or I don't know if you're on Instagram, or what's the best way for people to check out what you do and stay connected?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Jinahie, and that's Jinahie. I'll spell that one more time. It's Jinahie.
Awesome. And we will have that in our notes, and so people will be sure to follow you. And it's been my pleasure, and thank you again, Jinahie.
Oh, thank you so much. The pleasure and privilege is all mine. Thank you, Elle.
Wow, that was such a beautiful interview, and I just really think Jinahie is such a teacher. She's so good at sharing her wisdom and her experience in a way that can inform all of us. The thing, though, that I have been thinking about is what she says about sitting down to write every day, because I think as a writer myself, even though a lot of the writing is what I do here with you, I have just felt really inspired that a writer is someone who writes and just sits down and writes. And I really needed that reminder.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, Clara, because I'm actually doing some creativity coaching right now.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the focuses, because there's creativity coaching specifically geared for writers, geared for like visual artists, geared for actors, performers, because every resistance, every challenge is a little different.
Right.
And so it's been it's just been really exciting and empowering for me to work with all the just women in different areas of their creativity and their creative growth. In fact, I would love to open the option for people to schedule a free discovery call with me. And Claire, what would be the best way for them to get a hold of me?
Yeah, so if you want to schedule a free 30-minute call with Elle, super casual, no commitment, but just a great opportunity for you to talk through your creative goals and how Elle could help you reach them, you can email her at elle@ellezimmerman.com, and we'd love to get a call on the calendar.
If you were inspired by what you heard today, I would love for you to share it with a friend. And also, reviews are the number one way that this podcast will be able to help more people step into their creative life purpose, and I would be honored to have yours. I'm so grateful you joined us for today's episode. I bet you're here because you know there's something more for your life. Whether you're moving into something creative or letting go in order to take that next creative step, I have something for you. My free guide to graceful transitions. You can find it at ellezimmerman.com/transitions. And remember, if she made it, you can too.